Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 8th game in the World Chess Championship match being played between Liren from China and Jan Nepomniachtchi from Russia. Now, as we know, game number 7 was a 4th decisive game in a row with Jan winning. Today, Ding with the white pieces down 1 point, looking to strike back. Let's jump right into the action. So here we go. Ding playing with the white pieces. We get the move pawn to d4. Knight to f6 is played. We get c4, e6, knight c3. Now, Nimzo Indian was one of the openings that I thought was definitely possible. Ding wants to play a little bit more on the edge and b sharp. And after we get bishop to b4, Ding plays e3. Now, it's worth noting that f3 playing for the same-ish variation is also quite interesting. Ding goes e3, castles, and now we get a3. Now, this line is considered to be very, very sharp. White basically intentionally doubles the pawns on c3 and c4 and tries to play for f3 and e4 or bishop d3 and e4 or even knight e2, knight g3 followed by e4 to build the big white center. On the other hand, however, you do compromise the pawn structure. These two pawns on c3 and c4 are not really going anywhere, and your bishop on c1 is a little bit passive at the moment. So the game continues with d6. We get knight to e2. c5 is played here. Knight to g3, trying to play e4, open up the scope for the dark square bishop. Knight to c6 is played, and now we get this move rook a2. Now, this move is apparently not a novelty. It has been played in a game between John Burke and Ilya Nizhnik in 2022. That being said, it's a very, very rare game, very hard to find. But more importantly, when this move was played, there were a bunch of sleuths on the internet, and on one site in particular, lichess.org, who were looking for games that have been played in this position. And lo and behold, as we change the scene, you will notice here that in this position after rook to a2, there is a game played between two very low-rated players with the name of F. Vitaly and OPQRSTUV, or Oper Stub. Now, on first glance, you might think, well, it's nothing big, just one online blitz game. However, the sleuths on the internet did look up both of these accounts, and lo and behold, there were many, many games played, 72 in total between these two players on Lichess. And amazingly, what we discovered is there were at least like 3 or 4 games which have this position with h3. Now, this position was played before in the match between Ding and Jan, and there were other openings like the London as well. So what it turns out, now this has not been confirmed again, but it's my strong speculation that these were two accounts that were created by Ding Liren and Richard Report to play training games against each other. There were many, many games, many openings, and it appears to be a very serious leak in preparation. There were openings such as the King's Indian attack, which they played in the training games, which have not been featured in the match so far. Nonetheless, there are also lines in the Petrov as well, so it's a massive leak for Team Ding. Not really sure how it happened exactly, but nonetheless, it does appear that we have discovered the random accounts that the two players are playing on. Additionally, they also played games on chess.com as well. And in the middle of this game, as everyone started picking up on this news that there had been a leak of the accounts, this account F. Vitaly on chess.com changed their username from F. Vitaly to GG Why Not. So it's a very big blow to Team Ding. Nonetheless, it does show that they have been training and that Ding had studied this line before the game. So we get rook a2 played here. We get pawn to b6 being played by Nepo, e4, bishop a6, and now let's move bishop g5. I myself have looked at similar variations to this with white playing bishop g5, where after h6 you play this very nice move pawn to h4. Now, the idea is you're temporarily sacrificing the bishop if black takes, but if black does not take, it's very hard to play the position. If you play a move like knight to a5, for example, in this position, white can potentially play a move like queen to f3, and after takes, there might even be ideas like knight to h5 here, and after pawn takes pawn, knight to h7 and queen h3. White is actually winning here. If you play knight takes g5, there's knight f6 check, pawn takes, and queen h8 is checkmate. And if you play a move like rook to e8 here, white can now play the crushing move knight takes g7. If you play king takes g7, after queen to h6, king g8, and g6, white is crashing through. You can't move the knight because of mate in 1. And after pawn takes, queen takes, king f8, rook h7, there's a simple mate threat of queen f7 here. If you play rook e7, then I have rook h8 checkmate. So you have to be really, really careful how you play this position. Now, here there are a couple options that Nepo had. You can take the bishop, or you can potentially trade the pawns on d4 first and then take the bishop. Nepo decides to take the bishop first and just play g6 here. Once again, if you move the knight away, white goes queen h5 and wins the game. Same thing applies to knight d7, because after queen to h5, if you move the rook, it's mate in 1 with queen h8. And if you play this move pawn to f5 here, I simply go g6 and queen h8 will be checkmate on the next turn. So in this position, We get g6 being played by Nepo, and now Ding has a tough choice. He decides to take the knight here. Now it's worth noting with the supercomputer, Sessa and others, white can apparently play f4 and not take the knight right away, and after knight to d7, queen to g4, king g7, and f5, the game is spinning wildly out of control. I'm not going to pretend to know what the objective valuation is, but what I do know is that Sessa, the supercomputer in Norway, it does think that white is only very slightly worse by 0.1, so 0.1 differential. That's like 1/10 of a pawn. So white has a raging attack here. I think in human play, white is probably for choice because it's simply easier to play. You have to worry about f6, queen h4. All kinds of little tricks exist. Nonetheless, Ding uses some time and decides to take the knight instead. Also worth noting that if you play just a random move like queen f3 here, black can now go knight to h7, and you no longer have queen h5 because the pawn is on g6. So we get g takes f6, queen takes f6, and now let's move e5, a very enterprising move. Also worth noting here that one of the reasons that f4 could have been better is that if you could get this position where you're able to play this move e5 with the pawns all guarding each other after a move like queen g7 and knight e4, now your knight is jumping really fast to this f6 square, whereas in the game here, after e5 takes and say knight to e4, black can play queen to f4 attacking the knight, and you no longer get this grip over this f6 square. So Ding instead plays e5 and comes up with a very original idea of playing for d5. Jan plays knight to e7 here. Now again, hard to fault the players, very tough position to play. I think that Sessa preferred either rook a8 or rook fd8. I don't know which one is better, but we get knight e7, d6, and knight to f5, knight to e4, and queen to d8. Now at this point in the game, it's very hard to judge what's happening. White is temporarily down a pawn. However, you do have this very strong potential pass pawn on d6. Additionally, black has created the structure where you would really love to have this fianchettoed bishop on g7, but without the bishop, there are tricks like maybe, let's just say, white can get this position with f3, bishop c8, and g4, and then potentially create the double stack on the h file and checkmate the black king in the corner. So white's down a pawn. Unclear if this pawn is strong or not, but due to the weakness of the black king, there definitely is counterplay. Here we get queen to d3 played by Ding with the simple idea of playing for queen to h3 and queen to h8 or queen to h7 checkmate. So after queen to d3, we get king to g7, pawn to g4 is played here. Worth noting, of course, after queen h3, rook h8, when all the trades happen on h8 here in this position, white is still down a pawn, and this pawn on d6 is still super weak. If you play a move like rook to d2, for example, there's bishop b7, knight to g5, rook to d8 to attack the pawn, d7, and bishop c6. Black wins the pawn on d7, and with it, he wins the game. So we get g4 being played to attack the knight. Nepo plays bishop b7. Excellent move here, because now if white tries to take on f5 and black takes back, it looks like queen h3 is a good move here, threatening mate and 1 on h7, but black can simply capture the knight, and after queen to h7, king to f6, queen h4, king e6, the king is on the loose, but it's completely safe here in the center of the board with all these pawns and the wooden shield in front of it. So black is simply winning. So Ding plays rook h3 here. Also worth noting, after takes, knight g3, bishop h1, knight h1, and e4, queen d5, queen f6. Knight is bad. Bishop is very passive on f1. Weak pawn on d6, weak pawn on c3, and black is completely winning. So we get rook to h3, threatening to capture the knight because now the rook is no longer going to be under attack on h1. Here we get knight h4 played by Nepo after a long think. Now, in retrospect, I think Nepo even said this in the presser afterwards, he probably should have played this move rook h8. And it's not so much that it's like the absolute best move, but the point is that after white trades the rooks and takes the knight on f5, you undouble the pawns. You have these 4 pawns in the center which are really nicely placed. Your bishop on f1 is still very passive with this pawn on c4 and the queen on d3 in the way, and it's simply easier for black to play here. So probably a better move objectively from a practical standpoint. Instead, Nepo plays knight h4, Ding plays g5 here, trying to win the knight on h4 because now the queen no longer guards the knight. And here we get this huge mistake. Bishop takes e4. Now in this position, the computer thinks that after rook to h8, queen g3, bishop takes e4, and rook h4, it's still very complex here. After trading and going bishop to f3 followed by e4, black should be fine. Also worth noting that bishop f3 is a very critical move, because if you move the bishop to say c6, white can actually go check and then play f4 here, planning to double stack on the h file and checkmate once again. So if you play bishop to f3, you stop white from being able to push the pawn and stack on the h file. Very important move. Again, almost impossible to play unless you understand all the themes or you happen to be stonkfish. So in this position, Nepo chooses not to do this. Instead, he takes, and after queen e4, he plays this move knight f5. Now, as Nepo said afterwards, he completely missed this move rook d2. Now, this move is an excellent move. It guards the pawn on d6, and more importantly, white just wants to take on e5 or even go queen h1 and line up a new double stack on the h file as well. So after rook d2, the computer says this is +7. White is completely winning. Ding is on his way back. He's going to win. We're going to have a 5th decisive game in a row, and the match will be all square, right? Well, not so fast. We are only human after all. So we get rook to h8 being played here by Nepo. We get rook takes rook, queen takes rook, and now we get this move d7. Now this move is not a terrible move, mind you, and in fact the winning continuation here is simply not easy, but the move which would have won the game on the spot is this move rook to d3, and the reason is pretty dank. Black cannot really move this queen down the h file, because if you ever move like queen h4, you simply hang the rook. And if you play a move like rook to d8 so that the rook is no longer hanging, now I can play rook h3, attacking the queen, play queen f8, I take the pawn. If you go back, it's mate in 1 with rook h8. And when you play f6 and I take here, if you take with the queen, I have rook h7 check, removing the king from guarding the queen. And after king takes rook, queen takes queen, you're just down a queen for a rook, and Ding will win the game. So rook d3 is a very, very tough move to find, and I don't really think, considering the time situation, it's practical. So we get d7 played instead, which is a very logical move. Try to push p down the board. If black plays a move like a6, you simply sack the queen, and you make a new queen on d8, and you win the game. So we get rook d8, Ding takes the pawn, king to h7, Ding correctly does a little tickle to get closer to move number 40 and more time. So we get this tickle, and finally he goes queen c7, and now Nepo decides that his name he thinks he's Phil Ivey, or he thinks he's like this great poker player, and he goes all in with a clean bluff, playing this move queen to h4. Now this is a massive bluff because it in fact loses the game on the spot. That being said, as you can tell, white is still a little bit better. Now the computer liked queen to f8, and it felt that after, say, bishop to d3 and queen e7, white is still better here after takes and king d1, but maybe you can just sit with the queen and the rook here, always eyeing the pawn. If white tries to take a pawn on a7, for example, let's just say you go king g8 and queen takes a7, maybe you can get queen e4 and ideas like queen to h1 or queen to b1 due to the open white king. Now this exact position, of course, you'll notice the bar says white is winning because of queen takes b6 covering the square, but nonetheless these ideas do exist. Instead, we get queen h4, Jan doing his best poker impersonation here, and now we get the move king to d1, which is a huge mistake. Now it turns out that basically when Jan played this move, Ding believed him. Ding believed the bluff. He thought that Jan had the draw in hand with a repetition, but in fact there is no draw here. Now what Ding probably saw was after queen takes rook check, if you block with the bishop, I can do the classic right triangle where I go queen h1 and queen e4 and draw forever. If you play king d1, I use the other right triangle, and it's a draw as well with queen b1 and queen e4. So again, on first glance, when you get to this position, seeing that both the yo-yos with queen e4 h1 and queen b1 queen e1 are draws, it's very easy to assume it's a draw. However, in this position, you can play this move rook to e2 here, and after queen b1 king to d2, queen b2 king d3 and queen b1, again, if white goes back, it's always a draw. You simply have no squares for the king, but white can block with the rook, and after queen to d1 check, king to e4, queen takes c2, bishop d3 is winning. Now whether Ding saw this or not, it's hard to judge. He might have actually thought that in this position, after queen takes pawn, if you were to move the queen, for example, there's queen e3 checkmate here, and after queen f6 check, he might have thought, well, king h7 queen, and you lose the game. But if black plays king h7, you have queen takes pawn check, king goes back, and you actually queen with check before black can deliver the killer with queen e3, the killer blow, I should say. So this would have actually been winning the game. Instead, Ding just believes Jan, and he plays king d1, and now after queen takes g5, black wins the pawn on g5 but also guards the rook, and suddenly it's not really clear whether white even has an advantage. Game continues with king c2. We get queen to e7. Computer like knight h4 more, simply because it stops white from developing the bishop on this long diagonal towards a8. Queen e7 is played. We get bishop g2, idea to play bishop c6, and now Nepo plays e5, which is a huge mistake. What he should have played here was he should have played practically and just sack the pony on d4, because after pawn takes knight and rook takes d7, when white goes queen f4 and you take, let's just say white trades on d4, you can play this great move queen takes a3 here, and after white wins the rook, you have queen a4 check, checking the king, and win the rook on d7. And with 5 pawns versus 2 pawns, this should be a pretty easy draw here for black. So it's a huge missed opportunity. Nepo plays e5 instead, perhaps too over optimistic, perhaps who knows what was going through his mind, but he plays e5, which is a huge mistake, because now after bishop to e4, white has a great wooden shield in the middle of the board. Knight cannot go to either d4 or d6 now, because if you play knight d4 here, I take. If you take back, I guard the pawn on d7, and if you play rook takes d7 now, I simply take the pawn, and now I have this great pawn on e5, and I simply have a bishop. I think you have 1 pawn for the bishop here, and black is completely lost. So Jan plays knight h6 here with the idea of going knight g4 and potentially knight f6 to put pressure on the pawn. Or another idea would be that you can play something like this and then go e4 e3 and open up the e file. So we get this move knight h6, and here Ding takes the pawn. We get knight to g4, and now we get this huge blunder on move number 37 with this move bishop to f3. Now at this point in the game, if Ding plays this move bishop c6 to protect the pawn on d7, white can never lose here. Now it's not to say that black can't try to drum some counterplay with moves like e4 potentially, and say knight e5 or even e3, and knight takes e3, putting pressure on the pawn on c4, but nonetheless you can never lose due to the strength of this passed pawn, which will always be a thorn in black's side because it's only one square away from queening. So bishop c6 would have been a great move. Instead, Ding plays bishop f3, which is a huge blunder because now Nepo correctly senses the change in the position and he sacks the horse on f2. And now it's anyone's guess as to what will happen, because after rook takes f2 is played, we get this move pawn to e4. And what you'll notice here is that now if white plays bishop e2 and black takes, black has now eliminated both the f2 and the d7 pawn. The thing that was really important to note about the other line with knight f6, for example, in this position, is that in this position, even if black is able to play e4 and eliminate these pawns, you can never really lose here because the bishop guards this pawn, and even though you have two pawns, this pawn is so close to the end of the board that it's more than enough. But in this situation, after black is able to sack and go e4, suddenly you realize if you play bishop e2 and black takes, you've lost both of these pawns, and now black has three connected pawns that are marching down the king side. And as we like to say in the old school, a priest cannot stop an avalanche of pawns. So we get this move rook to e2, trying to pin the pawn. Nepo plays f5, creating the classic connect 3 with the 3 passed pawns, and you're still going to lose this pawn on d7, so you have to tread very, very carefully not to lose the game. We get queen takes b6 being played here by Ding. Rook takes d7, and now we have this move queen b8. Now this is an excellent move here, playing queen b8, because the idea that Ding has, he wants to go rook h2, set up the classic right triangle with the queen and the rook. So say black plays rook a7 after rook to h2 here with the idea of queen to h8, white is simply winning. If you play a move like pawn takes bishop, I go check, king f7, rook to h7, and I win your queen on e7. So queen b8 is a great move by Ding. That being said, at this point you could see from the visual reaction on his face, he was not happy with what he had done, because white has to be careful. Even if you can magically trade the queens, like in the game of queen d6 where you trade here, you might think, well, just move the bishop's better than the pawns. But the problem here is that your pawn structure on the queen side is so crummy. Your pawns on c3 and c4 are going nowhere. There's simply a pawn in the way. You can't push the pawns, and so you have this lone a pawn. But even if you go a4, for example, here, and black gets rook a6, king b3, king f6, you still can't push the pawn. You can't move the king in. Pawn on c5 restricts the king. So all these pawns and this king are actually very, very poorly placed here. And after, say, rook a2, rook a5, black's just going to go king e5, f4, f3, and the avalanche of pawns is marching down the board, and the priest can't do anything about it. So at this point, Ding correctly decides that he's got to sacrifice the bishop for the two pawns here, and now the position is completely balanced here. Black has an outside pawn, but white should be able to win the c pawn and move the king up without being in too much danger. Game continues with king f6 here, and now we get this move rook d8 played by Ding, and rather abruptly a draw offer is made by Ding, and Nepo accepts the offer. Now at this point, again, it should be a draw no matter what, but I still probably would have played rook a6 here to force Ding to have to play this move king d3. If white goes king b3 here, for example, after g5, a4, and g4, rook g8, king f5, suddenly black is for choice. The king and the pawn are marching up the board, and black can win this endgame quite easily because you can't push this a pawn ever, can't move the king up to escort the pawn, and you have to be really, really careful not to lose. So I probably would have played rook a6 if I was Jean, and the game probably would have continued with king d3, rook takes a3, rook to c8, rook a5, king e4, king e6, check, king d7 takes, and something like rook to a3, king d5 takes, and now I move like king c7, and the game should end in a draw here after check, king c8, king b5, and rook to h3, c5, rook to h6. And this is the classic Philidor position where when white pushes a pawn forward, you start checking from behind the pawn. Just make sure that you always check the white king here, and it will be a draw. Nonetheless, I still would have played rook a6 rather than accepting the draw offer, but at any rate, Nepo accepts the draw offer and he maintains a 1-point lead in the match. So you probably wonder, what are my general thoughts? Now, I would say this: a huge disappointment for Ding. He had multiple opportunities to win this game today, and he missed them. Additionally, on top of that, having the leak of his preparation, where many of the openings, these ideas he was playing training games against Richard Porin, are now out there. Everybody is aware of them, and Nepo's trainers are going to be studying these games furiously through the night. It's going to make it very, very difficult psychologically for Ding to recover. Again, great chance today to even the match. Unable to do that. Tomorrow he has to play with the black pieces once again. Nepo has been really, really effective with the white pieces in this match so far. He's put massive pressure on Ding. Will we see a French? Will we see something else? Remains to be seen. But at any rate, I think it's a big uphill battle for Ding now. All things considered, the leak not converting this winning position where it was +7 today. It's going to be a big struggle. Nonetheless, Ding is a great champion. There is a reason that he is playing in this match, so it remains to be seen, and that's why we play this great game of chess, because the results are not predetermined. We don't know what's going to happen, and so far this match has been very topsy-turvy, but every day has been really exciting. So on that note, you guys, I hope you've enjoyed this recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below, and we will be back tomorrow with another great recap of the 8th round game played today between Ding and Jan Nepomniachtchi. I may or may not do a video on the league, a separate video. Perhaps we'll release that later, but we will see. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see everybody very, very soon. Bye.